Welcome to St. Mark's Church. My name is Bob, and I'm really honored and privileged to be one of the pastors here. For those of you who are watching us right now, welcome to our service today from wherever you might be watching, maybe all over the world. For the past 196 days, officially, we've all been caught up in what is for sure the most penetrating and powerful epidemic of our lifetime. I'm pretty sure that one of these days when history begins to write a report on this COVID outbreak, it might be written that it was and is the most formidable, intimidating, and disruptive viral upsurge in American history. I don't think any of us were around when the influenza outbreak of 1918 occurred, commonly referred to as the Spanish flu. It was a powerful and deadly H1N1 virus, killed 50 million people worldwide, 675,000 Americans, mostly under the age of 20, died in that epidemic. But even though our tragic numbers don't compare with those statistics, there is no question that we have been hammered by this COVID conquest. Can you believe that just 9 months ago we were celebrating New Year's 2020 with champagne toast, and we were breaking out the collard greens and black-eyed peas for a traditional New Year's Day dinner? None of us would have imagined that by now we would all be speaking a brand new language, better known as Corona. Now we need a dictionary and sometimes a glossary to be able just to talk to each other. It didn't take long for two new people that we never knew before. They became the most famous people in America, Dr. Fauci and Dr. Burtz, with her fashionable scarves that changed almost quicker than the pandemic news. Our daily conversations began to include asymptomatic, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, PPE. I never heard of that before. Personal protective equipment. We started talking about sheltering in place and physical distancing, incubation period, mortality rate, flattening the curve, contact tracing, virtual learning, online church, hand sanitizers everywhere. We were instructed how to wash our hands for a minimum of 20 seconds, many times a day with soap and water. When I look at my hands, they have aged 5 years in the last few months. Who had ever heard the phrase, "you're on mute," before the pandemic? Zoom has become the most popular form of video conferencing in the world. It happened almost overnight. And for the very first time, there was not a shortage of milk and bread with a predicted North Carolina snowstorm, but there was this widespread shortage of toilet paper, of all things. And we knew we were in an epidemic when you couldn't even find toilet paper on Amazon Prime. Within a few weeks, actually we thought it was going to be just a few weeks, but after a few weeks we recognized that this coronavirus might be more serious than we thought, and it was beginning to slowly take over our world. But we started encouraging each other with phrases like, "we'll get through this together, and this is the new normal, and we'll be stronger on the other side of this." But nobody, even now, wants to predict that other side. First responders and healthcare workers were finally recognized for the true heroes that they are, and we were being told that staying apart was the best way to stay connected. How about that? But I guess in the end, all of this will probably be a small price to pay if one day we are able to escape this unpredictable and disruptive little germ. So here's what I want you to do. And you can tell somebody beside you if you want to, on a germ scale from 1, which is extremely low, to 10, I want you to rate yourself. Some of you would say, "Man, I'm a 1 or a 2. I mean, what's a few germs? No big deal." In fact, maybe some of you are so resistant to germs that you are almost convinced that it's a conspiracy theory being promoted by the hand sanitizing manufacturing companies. No germs. For some of you, You love this required physical distancing because you're convinced that just about everybody in this room is a gigantic dirt bag of contamination. Now, my wife, she'll be here for the second service, I hope. But she will tell you that my weirdest obsession, it may be one of 2 or 3 things on my OCD personal list, is I can't stand my hands to be dirty. It's just a... Now, Susan will tell you that it's because when I was a little kid, my mom messed me up because she asked me 52 times a day, did you wash your hands? And at my age, trying to contain this obsession, somebody suggested, you can get better one day, but then they said, well, it might cost you a small fortune in therapy. Susan now says that this coronavirus requirement of washing your hands, she tells everybody, man, it's like Christmas Day every day to Bob. He loves washing his hands. So, look, I have been dreading this moment all week long. So, you cannot imagine how this is beginning to tear my nerves up. So, anybody want to come up and shake my hand? This may be the least infected I might be, who knows? But now watch this. So, sandwich. So, is this sandwich infected? Are you kidding me, man? That's an egg and cheese sandwich. I don't eat an egg and cheese sandwich but about twice every year, and I didn't plan for this part. Do y'all like it when your fingernails have dirt underneath them? I don't. I'll work it out after a while. Anybody want an egg and cheese sandwich? All right, now, today, here's why I tell you that. Today I want to call your attention to a couple of really short Bible stories. Now, at first glance, you're going to say, I don't get it. I don't see the connection. But hopefully, after a while, you're going to see how these two stories are just woven together. And if this sermon works, then you'll see that the people in these two stories have a whole lot in common with us. So we're going to dive deep. Maybe we better pray, and then we'll get started. We'll be in Luke chapter 5 if you have a Bible and you want to prepare yourself. So Jesus, we come before you, and we bless your name. We praise you for the ministry that we are able to continue, even though we are right here, I want to say in the middle. I hope it's maybe, I don't know, is it the middle of this crazy adversary called Corona? But even now, God, we believe that your word is able to break through. So come, Spirit of God, speak to us with power and clarity through your word in the scriptures that we believe that you have inspired, and we ask these in all things in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And we say together, amen. Luke chapter 5. Now watch this. One day, Jesus was in a city where there was a man covered with a serious skin disease. Your translation might say leprosy. When the man saw Jesus, he bowed with his face to the ground. He begged Jesus, "Sir, if you want to, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out, touched him, and said, "I want to, so be clean." Immediately, his skin disease went away. Jesus ordered him, "Don't tell anybody. Instead, go show yourself to the priest." But the news about Jesus spread even more. Large crowds gathered to hear him and have their diseases cured. Now let me set a little context here. Jesus and his team of apprentices, they are at a small village not too far from Capernaum, which was a fishing village on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee. I've told you this many times. Jesus chose Capernaum to be ground zero for all of his public ministry. Everything was kind of launched out of Capernaum. So on this occasion, they're not too far from Capernaum. They're in another small village. Just about everything Jesus is going to do for 3 years is launched from Capernaum. Luke says that on this particular day they were in a village. He doesn't name what village, but Jesus encounters a man infested with an advanced case of leprosy. In those days, the word leprosy covered a wide variety of skin diseases, all very common and devastating in this Middle East part of the world. Researchers believe that skin disorders were so popular or probable during this time because these people were being baked by the Mideastern summer sun, and they mostly didn't think about having adequate covering, and they certainly had no sunscreen. So skin diseases were prevalent, many times chronic and sometimes fatal. There's a lot of information even all the way back in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew scriptures, about how to deal with some of these skin disorders. In fact, there is a whole section in the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. In the book of Leviticus is chapters 13 and 14. There are these 2 chapters. This is 1,200 years before Jesus. And it's all devoted to how to deal with this devastating virus. Now, there were obviously no hospitals, no emergency departments, walk-in clinics, no public health department. So the only person who was qualified to diagnose leprosy was the village priest. So you'd have to go to the priest, and he would examine you and declare you clean or infected. There were some sweeping standards for how to best deal with a skin disease and prevent its spread, but leprosy was something that everybody in this generation feared. If it was determined by the priest that you had an outbreak of leprosy, there were certain defined protocols and mandatory steps that an infected person was required to do. Now, I'm going to read a passage from Leviticus 13, and some of you are going to say, Bob, I think you clipped this out of the paper yesterday. Watch this. This is 3,400 years ago. A priest must examine the infected person. If the skin disease has spread, he is unclean, and the priest must make a public announcement. A person with a skin disease that has spread must wear a covering over his mouth, and if he comes near to other people, he is required to shout, unclean. That person will be unclean the whole time he has the disease. He must live alone outside the camp. Not only was leprosy very painful, created indescribable physical and emotional suffering, but maybe the worst part of the whole thing was that a leper, someone that had been declared sick with this disease, was quarantined and isolated from everything and everybody. This was not like a 10 or a 14-day quarantine with COVID. This was a life sentence. It disrupted everything in your life. This disease separated you from your family, your work, from your business. If you owned a small company, that whole thing was up for grabs. Your livelihood, certainly your investment in a church, in a faith community. You were not just sick, but whenever you had to, for whatever reason, and not very often, venture outside of this isolation zone, if you came in contact with a non-infected person with a face covering, you had to shout, unclean. And that was an alert to them that you have an active case. Now remember, these ancient people had no idea about germs. They didn't know about germs. They had no clue about how contagious infections work. But even 30-some hundred years ago, they were beginning to believe that certain things could rub off on you. That for some reason, you needed to take precautions or maintain distance from an infectious disease or infected people because nobody had yet invented these neat little nasal swabs to collect germ samples. I brought enough for everybody and you can just practice while I'm preaching. Susan and I we had dinner a few nights ago with an Elon co-ed, and she's a junior and a member of the women's soccer team. She's already been tested 7 times. So I said, so the swab, she said, swabs are absolutely nothing to me anymore. So anybody, if you need a swab, they're all right here. And you can stick your hand in the dirt too if you want to. Leprosy. It was an incurable disease. Most of the time, you had it until you died. Sometimes it caused your death. Your only hope was for there to be some supernatural intervention. And once again, if you were convinced that you had somehow been made clean, you would go back to the priest, but he was the only person who could declare you clean, which meant that if he said you're clean, then you had to go through, what's this now, if this doesn't sound familiar, then you had to go through a rigid purification practice that would last for weeks and weeks so that you could finally be labeled all clear. I thought about this recently. Susan and I were headed to a venue where I was scheduled to officiate at a wedding, and she always drives for me so that I can either look at my wedding notes or sermon notes or whatever. And so on those, when I'm out, on the road like that, no matter the distance or the travel time, it almost always requires a bathroom break. Maybe 2 if I stop at Starbucks. Now, as you know, if you're out on the road, when you stop for a bathroom break, you're rolling the dice. Yes? So she pulled into a gas station. I made a beeline to the restroom. It was a 2-seater. There was one guy ahead of me. No problem. I accomplished the purpose for which I had stopped. I walked over to the sink to discover that the hand soap was empty. Now that was troubling enough because remember my childhood experience and my cleanliness at all cost mom. So now when I completed my 20 seconds worth of hand washing with nothing but water, no soap, the other dude said, you know what he said to me? Hey, I'm sorry, buddy, but I took the last of the hand towels, but here you can share mine. And he just dumped his towels in my hands and walked out the door. Now what? So what do I do? Well, if I'd have had on jeans, I'd have just, no problem. But I was in a light gray suit on the way to officiate at a wedding. When I got back to the car, my hands were still dripping, and I told Susan, find me another restroom. So about a half a mile down the road, there was an acceptable fast food restaurant. I went inside there, and I'm telling you, I did the deep dive, all-out surgical scrub. Hey, look, I don't care what y'all say about me or put on social media. I am really not a germaphobe. It's just my hands. Anyway, thanks a lot, Mom. She's going to watch this. And then she's going to, she'll call me. Now, I salute all of you who have given your entire professional career working in a lab and looking through these high-powered microscopes, studying germs. You know a lot about bacteria and viruses and and the science and medicine of the whole deal. But are you aware that our understanding of germs is relatively a new thing? In 1861, the famous French biologist and chemist Louis Pasteur, not only did he discover the principles of vaccination, but his crowning achievement, his gift to our world, was what he called germ theory. He was able to identify that there are certain bacteria and viral germs that they are invisible unless he was looking through one of his primitive microscopes. But he figured out that if these germs entered the human body, they created a lot of chaos. Now think about this. Back as far as the Torah, more than 3,500 years ago, God was already prepping us, wasn't he? With a few forward steps toward hygiene and how to prevent diseases. So Luke chapter 5. Here's a guy. He's got a serious disease. He's got leprosy. It was a life sentence of pain, suffering, and isolation. He was never going to be back in contact with the rest of the world. But on this day, this man decides, hey, I'm going for it. I'm going for broke. So he violates every religious protocol in the book, the entire book of Leviticus, if you want to. And he ignores physical distancing. He doesn't pay attention to any of the standards and the boundaries. He does not broadcast behind his face covering, unclean. He just walks up to Jesus. Now, I can promise you, when the rest of the crowd saw him walk up to Jesus this far away, nobody stepped in between as if to protect Jesus. No, you weren't going to risk it. You touched the dude, now you got to be quarantined until a priest can determine that you're not infected. The man falls to his knees, Luke says, and says, Jesus, I know you can do this. I know you can if you're willing. Are you willing? He did not wonder if Jesus might be able to do it, but would he intervene? And Jesus' immediate reaction was, Jesus also totally violates all of the etiquette and does something which is just as outrageous. This was a scandal in the first degree. What does it say? Mark says, when he's telling the same story, moved with compassion, Jesus reached out and touched him. I am willing. I will do this. Be clean. Jesus was moved with compassion. This is a great word in the original language. It is so good that I'm going to teach you how to say it. You're going to go away today having really conquered one of the great Greek words of all times. The word translated into English as compassion is the word splagnisomai. All right, splagnisomai. Now, I don't want you to get too close to anybody because splagnisomai might cause you to, so if you need to, I want you to say it, but I want you to put your mask on if you're sitting close to somebody that you don't want to infect. Somebody that might have to be isolated for 2 weeks. So let's say it. Splagnisomai. Say it out loud. Splagnisomai. Now, look, I don't know any other way to say it, but this word, you know what this word means? It literally means bowels. Jesus was moved in his bowels. Now, that sounds radical to us, but not in the culture where Jesus lived. These people believed that the place of love and mercy was so deep that you would feel it in your bowels. Now, we typically say things like, oh, my heart was stirred, or I felt the pain deeply in my heart and soul. But for these people, compassion went a lot deeper than that. We might say something like, boy, that was gut-wrenching. That's what the word means. It had a way to describe an excruciating and difficult moment in life. Felt compassion. So they used the word splagnisomai. Now you can bet that Jesus hated what this disease was doing to this man and so many others in his generation. So watch, this is an outrageous moment when Jesus is going to break all the procedures, all the safety boundaries. Moved with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand, touched the man. Oh, Jesus, why did you do that? Now why did you touch the guy? Now you're going to have to go to the priest, be isolated until you can get the all clear. So was it mandatory for Jesus to touch the man? Did he have to touch the man? Of course he didn't. There's plenty of evidence. There are other times in the scriptures when Jesus would heal somebody without any close proximity at all. It was almost like a drive-by healing. But watch this. This word touched, it's not like It's not like Jesus covered his face and put on a pair of gloves and a hazmat suit and touched the guy. The word means, watch this, the word means fasten. Jesus fastened himself to this man and said, I do want to touch you. So be clean. Some English translations, maybe you're looking at a Bible right now and it says be healed instead of be clean. But I'm telling you now, and I'm not just trying to impress you with a little bit of Greek stuff, and you don't have to say this one, but the word in the original language is katharizo, and it literally means to remove the stain and dirt. Now we all know what it's like to dribble. Don't you hate it when you dribble something on your shirt or your blouse? You know what's worse? It's when you're going to a wedding and you got to officiate and you dribble something on your silk necktie. That's why I don't wear neckties anymore. I wear bow ties, so that now you got to have some special treatment. Or maybe it's pots and pans in the kitchen, and sometimes you have to use the old elbow grease because the stains and the grime. I wonder if Jesus was doing more in that moment than just eliminating the man's physical suffering. Remember, it's been a long time since this man has touched another human being. Maybe years. The only other people that he might have touched were the other infected outcasts. So can you imagine this moment of celebration when Jesus tells him that he has received a gift of restoration, but maybe more than that? I wonder if the rest of this man's life that he remembered the day when this rabbi fearlessly attached himself at his moment of greatest need. And then Jesus asks the man for a favor. He said, hey, look, it would be a big help to me and my ministry if you just didn't say anything about this to anybody. Now, Jesus does that several times in his public ministry, and sometimes, doesn't that sound so counterintuitive? You would think maybe that Jesus would want him to, just go tell as many people as you can so the ministry can increase. So what's up with this? Don't go tell anybody about this. Well, Jesus knew that he had lots more ministry yet to do, a lot more work, and it was going to require a balance between preaching and miracles, between teaching and splagnisomai, compassion. So the last thing Jesus needed at this point was to be distracted by a whole lot of sensationalism. Or too many demands on his time and energy. He wanted to stay focused on the mission at hand, but it's evident, we know now, it doesn't say it, but we know that this guy violated the request. Here's what Luke says, but despite Jesus' instructions, the report of his power spread even faster, and vast crowds came to hear him preach and to be healed of their diseases. Tom Wright, who wrote the book Simply Jesus that we're basing this series on, look at what Tom Wright says. Jesus, the first man in history to reach out and touch lepers on purpose, did not catch the disease himself, but later he died at the hands of a bunch of angry religious do-gooders who wouldn't have touched the infected man on a bed. Religious do-gooders. Is it possible that we sometimes get caught up with people that we just don't want to be around, the untouchables, the undesirables, and we draw lines? Sure, we do it all the time. The protocol and procedures for these religious leaders was very simple. Separate. Avoidance. Stay far away from people who might be infected with the sin or sickness of disobedience, of a reckless lifestyle. Because remember, in this era of human history, it was believed that if you had a sickness, it was the direct result of your sin. So the religious people were saying, nah. But for Jesus, his go-to was not avoidance, but involvement. That's why he was always reaching out a hand toward the outcast, the excluded, the broken, and the marginalized. Now, somebody in this church, one of you or somebody watching this service online, somebody in this church is going to have an opportunity this week to stand up for something that's right, or to speak out against something that we know biblically is wrong. And in that moment, we all have a decision to make: avoidance or involvement. I'm telling you, there's a lie being circulated around this planet straight from the evil one that says that if you are a deeply spiritual person, that you just hang out with deeply spiritual people. Don't miss what I'm saying, everybody. Now, we all need to be surrounded by faithful and seasoned believers, especially people who are ahead of us. We need to be influenced and impacted by people's life experience that maybe can rub off on us, but maybe this has been one of the most costly side effects of the coronavirus. It's put these walls up, mandatory, between us and somebody. And here we are halfway into the 7th month. Our physical proximity has been seriously limited. It's taken a toll on us. Will there be some long-term effects? I can't prove it to you, but I'd bet on it. Nobody knows what's going to be on the other side of this pandemic. But I'll tell you, we have people who are already experiencing some PTSD that's been created by this extraordinary season of disconnect and discontent. Now, we all know that this 75-minute service is just a part of who we are, but let me ask you something. If we could get back to January and February of 2020, would we take it? Would we take it? Yeah. I'll tell you what, I'm weary, like you. I'm weary of weddings and funerals behind a mask, aren't you? But what I'm saying is, God's intention was for us to always build our lives around people, some of which don't look like us, or act like us, or believe like us, or think like us, or vote like us. If you've decided that the only people that you're ever going to be around are those who name the name of Jesus, then your influence is going to be seriously limited. If you never listen to anything except K-Love Radio or read books by Christians, or if you only eat Christian chicken down at Chick-fil-A, you can't even get that today. If that's all, come on, friends. You know that walls don't work. It's one of the reasons this season is so hard. Sometimes there are these fortresses that we build or we allow to be built between us and people or people groups that we would consider to be offensive or disgusting. And the minute we do that, we're putting limits on God's possibility of influencing this world through us. Now, the good news is, y'all remember the WWJD bracelets? What would Jesus do? We don't have to ask that question. The only question you need to ask is, what did he do? What did Jesus do? Because the Bible is clear. If you figure out what he did, just go do it. That's what for example, when you read the New Testament, I love this about Jesus. You can't find a single time when he turned down an invitation to a dinner party. He liked to go to parties, and a lot of those parties he attended were with people who did not give a rip about him. In fact, that's where Jesus had some of his most fascinating conversations. He would laugh and cry and grieve with some people, and he would debate with others. On one occasion when he walked in, you remember this, when he walked into the temple in Jerusalem and he saw faithful people being taken advantage of, he went ballistic and started kicking over the tables. He preached to thousands who would gather over on the hillsides near the Sea of Galilee, but he also had a one-on-one nighttime conversation with a top religious leader in the privacy of the night. Jesus loved to be around untouchables and the unlovable. He partied with friends and those who were also opposed to him. Jesus prayed a lot. Sometimes he would pray with his team of apprentices. Sometimes he would go into the home of a stranger and pray over sick and desperate people. Many times Jesus would sneak off by himself and spend private time with the Father. Jesus would show up at dinner with some of the most educated and experienced religious leaders. He always knew when he was hanging out with religious people, it was not going to be a great night. It was going to have some difficulty. Let me show you one example, and this is the other part of the story. I want to show you how these are weaved together. We're going to jump down in Luke 5, a few verses, and I want you to see another story of another broken person who was exactly like the leper. He needed a new lease on life. Luke 5. Jesus now is back in Capernaum. He's facing a lot of ministry demands. He's very busy. He decides to take a walk beside the Sea of Galilee. Crowds are following him, and check this out. Later, as Jesus left the town, he saw a tax collector named Levi, that would be Matthew to us, sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me and be my disciple," Jesus said to him. So Levi got up, left everything, and followed him. I select you, Levi. Come and follow me. And it seems like when you read it, it seems like an impulsive, almost reckless decision. Levi just leaves behind his career and a lucrative future. But I wasn't there in the moment, so I don't know. I don't know what might have led Levi to make this, what seems to us to be a spontaneous decision, to follow this untested, untried, unproven rabbi. Can you imagine what it must have been like that night when Levi went home? Talked to his wife and family if he was married. "Hey, everybody, just thought I'd let you know I turned in all my tax ledgers today, left the ad machine behind. I'm going to tag along with this preacher for a while." Can't imagine that going well. I cannot overstate to you how disgusting and despicable tax collectors were. You've heard me say this before, but if you think you ever get frustrated with the IRS, no comparison. It was the sleaziest job in town. Capernaum, one of the reasons why Capernaum was such a prominent place for tax collectors is because it was a prominent fishing village. There was plenty of business and commerce, so lots of people were having to pay tax. There was also a major highway that kind of goes, I'm doing this backwards, kind of goes like this, and it goes right through Capernaum and down across Israel and right down into North Africa, into the country of Egypt. It's called the Via Maris. And so it was a great trade route. That means that when you came through Capernaum, if you were traveling with some goods headed to Egypt, you had to pay a poll tax, which was just a great incentive if you were a tax collector. The Romans set the tax code, somewhere between 70 and 90% of your income. And these tax collectors could legally, was not against the law, they could legally extort whatever amount above that they could squeeze out of you, and that was theirs to keep. That was their take-home salary. It was corrupt and profitable. Tax collectors were not even allowed to worship in the synagogues. And Jesus said, "I choose you, Levi." This was a scandal in the making. It will eventually tarnish the reputation of Jesus even more. Watch this. Later, Levi held a banquet, a party in his home with Jesus as the guest of honor. Many of Levi's fellow tax collectors and other disreputable sinners also ate with him. Look at this. I love how Mark puts it. There were many people of this kind among Jesus' followers. That sounds like St. Mark's Church. Disreputable sinners. Notice that the only friends Matthew had were people just like himself. So the guest list was probably suspect. Jesus has already taken over Levi's heart. He's already convicted this man of his runaway greed and his lust for money. And Levi does something really radical. He throws this gigantic party, invites all of his former tax-collecting colleagues and business associates, and then he invites Jesus. I don't know how the conversation went. Luke doesn't tell us, but I can imagine Levi going to Jesus and saying, hey, I know this is a long shot, but I've got a lot of buddies, and they don't have a clue what you have to offer to them. I was thinking maybe I'd have a party, invite them all over. Would you come? And what did Jesus say? I'll be there. I'm all about parties. But then when the Pharisees and teachers of religious law saw Jesus eating with tax collectors and other sinners, the Pharisees and their teachers of religious law complained bitterly to Jesus' disciples, why does your teacher eat and drink with scum? Remember that the Pharisees were seriously super devout men. They were the spiritual leaders in the community. There were about 6,000 Pharisees in all of Israel, spread out all across the country, and they certainly did not hide their contempt and their hatred for Jesus. So when rumors started to circulate that Jesus might be the long-awaited Messiah, the Pharisees totally rejected that possibility because they said a Messiah would never hang out with reprehensible people like tax collectors. And here's Jesus touching people with leprosy, and then he's hanging out at parties with despicable, despised sinners, even having dinner with these crooks. Don't miss this. One of the lessons Jesus was teaching by his own example was, I came for the outcast, the rejected, the marginalized. And let's be clear, Jesus was in no way condoning what the tax collectors were doing. He was quick to call it out. But he was determined that he was going to magnify and expand his influence and persuasion in the best ways he could, which was all about, watch this now, knocking down walls and building proximity. Leprosy? Nah. Tax collecting? Nah. Proximity. Now, somebody in this church or watching, you're going to have a chance to represent this sometime this coming week. There might be something or somebody at work. You're going to have to stand up and confront it. I'm not talking about a self-righteous way, just with resolute persuasion. There might be a moment this week when you just have to walk over and say, hey, I'll stand with you. Maybe you're in a group this week and you hear an inappropriate conversation, also known as gossip, about another person in the group. And you could say, wait a minute. These conversations don't help anybody. God will honor that. Now pay attention. Watch this. There is no mention anywhere that a single one of these tax collectors, including Matthew, cleaned up their life before they attended this party with a purpose. It's probably the reason why Jesus was so readily willing to go to parties. Because that would put him in proximity with sick, disjointed, marginalized, broken people. Bob, are you saying that Jesus went to this party because he loved people like this? That's exactly what I'm telling you. Jesus was clear. How many times did he say it about his unwavering mission? He would say, I have come to seek and save the lost. And I've said it 100 times at least. Take note on this one. A fisherman has never cleaned the fish before he catches them. So why does the church expect that? Why do we expect the world out there to clean up their act before they invest in a community like this? How foolish is that? So this Matthew party for Jesus was a no-brainer. But watch what happens. Because Jesus overhears the conversation with the religious power brokers. The Pharisees and their teachers of religious law complained bitterly to Jesus' disciples, why does your teacher eat and drink with such scum? Jesus answered, healthy people don't need a doctor. Sick people do. I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners and need to repent. Let me tell you something. It makes about as much sense for Jesus to turn down a party with a large group of sinners as it does a doctor to refuse to get close to sick people. I have several young friends who right now are in medical school. I have one of those friends is also currently in an extended residency program. Now help me understand this. Help me understand. Why would a person subject themselves to organic chemistry and a decade of postgraduate work if they don't want to be around sick people? Why would the Redeemer and Savior of this world show up and keep broken, lost, and hopeless people at a distance? What kind of Savior would that be? So what did Levi and this leper have in common? Both were unclean. You know something else? I'm unclean. Anybody else? I figured out a long time ago that if you don't know you're lost, then how are you going to be found? I know for me, before I could be rescued, I needed to realize that my life was a train wreck about to happen. I needed a starting point and a turning point. And admitting that I'm a part of the unclean, that's where it started with me. Our enemy, though, see, has a strategy. He wants to keep us in the dark. He doesn't want you to believe that you need a savior, a rescuer, a doctor, someone who specializes in this unclean business. Let me tell you, if we ever get to a place where we where we believe that we are not unclean, that's trouble. If we get to a place where we can believe that we are unclean, you know what our adversary is going to do? Then he's going to start lying to you and trying to tell you that you're irreparably hopeless. Jesus called him the father of lies. And so he's going to distort everything in your world. He's going to say things to you like you're a failure and a disappointment. He's going to say that mistake was too big. That decision was too reckless. You will forever be lonely. Your mistakes will forever define who you are and what your future looks like. You are unlovable. You are a drunk, divorced, a disappointment, a loser. Why don't you just face it? You will forever spend your future trying to earn God's favor. That's a lie. I recently spent some time with a guy who's figuring out Jesus, and he's got some complications in his past, like we all do. But the enemy is playing a broken record in his head. This is who you are. And Jesus says, no, I am willing. Be clean. You are who Jesus says you are. You can be forgiven. You can come to the cross. You are invited into this amazing journey. Do you deserve any of this? No, but God chased you down and said, I'll choose you. The relentless love of God. We sing about it all the time. The relentless love of God is so often so overwhelming that it looks reckless. Jesus said the love of God is like a shepherd. He had 100 sheep. One of the sheep got missing. So he left the 99 unprotected and went to search for that one missing sheep. Why? Because one matters. And there have been times when I've been that one. How about you? I have a past that I cannot defend. There are days even now, even though I've walked with Jesus now for more than a half a century, there are days now that I can't defend. Am I the only one? Jesus chased me down. He pursued me. I don't want to ever forget that. And I just happen to be so naive as to believe that if we could get ourselves focused on Jesus, that he could change everything in this world. At least he would make a dent in it. Jesus met a man with an advanced case of leprosy. When the man saw Jesus, he bowed his face to the ground, begging to be healed. Lord, if you are willing, you can heal me and make me clean. Jesus reached out and touched him. I am willing. Those are the words of the redeemed. These are the words for people like us who were lost and confused, but God never gave up. Never stopped pursuing us. We were broken and God chased us down. And we said, you can make me clean if you want to. And Jesus said, of course I do. Of course. But now, go tell as many people as you can. Ransomed, bought with a price, delivered, unchained, set free. That's my story. So, I want you to hear this song. I want you to let it wash over you. Those of you in the room, I want you to stand. But just hang on just a second. And just let the song wash over you. If you need to, you can even reach out your hands. If ever we needed you, Lord, if ever we needed you, it's now. I love you, SMC.